In this video, we will review the solution and concepts that you need to know for Tutorial 4 using logical operators for IT 1010. This is Linda Gaston, your instructor. So let's take a look at the assignment. In this problem, you're to create an application that allows the user to enter an integer between 25 and 55 into a text control box. So this is your first clue. You're going to have a text control box on your form. When the user clicks a check value button control, the range value entered by the user in the text control box is checked for validity. The program should display the message the number is valid if the number is between 25 and 55, and the program should display the message the number is not valid if the number is outside of this range. The program should display the message the number is not a valid integer if the user has entered a space, a decimal, or a character. So you have some hints here that are very useful. You're going to use an if-else statement with a logical operator. And we talked about logical operators when we met the last time. They're and, or, and not, the double ampersand, or the two straight bars for or, and then the exclamation point for not. And you'll see this in action in a minute. You can see the textbook pages 229 through 231 for guidance here. And you're also going to use the int.tryParse method, and you can review that on textbook pages 236 through 239. You're to be sure to include your student name and a proper title in the title bar of the form. And you're going to modify your C# code to include an exit button and provide comments for each event. And you can add a user-friendly tooltip on the check value and exit button. So let's talk about some of the supporting concepts for this assignment. The first is you're going to use the if-else statement. And as we've discussed, this statement executes one or more statements if some Boolean expression is true, or another block if the Boolean expression is false. So an if statement has two parts, an if clause and an else clause. So you can see here, we're going to test some expression, and if it's true, we're going to execute a series of statements. If it's false, we're going to execute the statements here after the if statement. And this is a Boolean expression here because it's either going to be true or false, and Booleans have just two values, true or false. The tryParse method is very useful because the user is free to enter any data they want on a visual C# form. So tryParse methods are used to prevent exceptions from occurring if the user enters special characters or character data, or in our case, we're going to be evaluating integers or whole numbers. So if the user enters a decimal number, we won't be able to work with that. With the tryParse method, you can determine whether a string contains a value that can be converted to some data type before it's converted to that data type. So you can actually avoid an error. Now remember, as we've discussed, when data goes on a form in Visual C#, that data, even though you may enter a number, it's interpreted as a string, which is a collection of characters, not numbers, and can't be used for mathematical purposes. So we want to use a tryParse to make sure that we can convert what's entered on the text field into a number for our comparison purposes. So tryParse methods don't throw exceptions, as we've discussed in Chapter 3. So you can use them without a try-catch statement. There's several tryParse methods that you get for free with the .NET Framework. Remember, we've discussed when your program loads, it's running on the .NET Framework, and a lot of libraries, which include methods that allow us to do work, are included. And here are a few of them. We can use the int.tryParse method to convert a string to an integer, or something that's entered in a text box to a number that we can use. We can convert it to doubles, decimals, but in our case, in this exercise, we're just going to convert it to an integer, which again is a whole number. So here's the structure, and it's important that you follow this structure exactly. If any of these characters are missing, if this comma is missing, if this left parentheses or right parentheses is missing, your compiler won't know how to process your statement and you will get an error. So remember, C# is a language of precision. So look at this structure carefully and make sure you follow it. So there's two arguments that you pass when you want to use a try parse method to test something that's entered in a text box in this case. First is the string that you want to convert. Now that's going to be what's in your text box. And the second is the variable in which you want to store the converted data. So if you're parsing to an integer, that string that you parse to an integer is going to be stored in this target variable. So here's an example. Let's say we have some integer that's called number, and remember, as we've discussed, we have to declare our variables before we can use them. So we want to store our value in this integer number. So we're going to declare it so we can use it. Then we have an if-else statement here. If int.tryParse, remember this is the string that we want to convert, and we're assuming here that this string is put in an input of field in your form called input text box.text, and we're going to save it in number. So we're going to save it here in this integer that we've declared. So if we're able to successfully parse this, we're going to show in a message box success. Otherwise, we're going to show enter a valid integer. So this is the structure. Now let's take a look at the solution to our tutorial. As shown in the directions, I have used the toolbox to drag a label over on the form. And I put in the label, so if we're here on this label, I put in the label text field, enter an integer in the range of 25 to 55. So that's the text displayed for this label. Then I created the text box, which is going to store the user's data. Then I created a button that says check value as we were instructed. So when the user clicks this, we're going to check the validity of the number that's here, and an exit button here. And as you can see on this check value button, the text is check value. And on this exit button, the text is exit. Now let's take a look at the code that supports this form. So remember, we've talked about the fact that there has to be an event handler for each button on a form, so that when that button is clicked, there's code to handle the click event and make something happen. So here is the click event for our first button, which is called button 1. I should have changed that to a more meaningful name. So if you look at this button, it's called button 1. So the click event handler for this one is button 1 underscore click. So Visual Studio set this method up for you. That's why we like IDEs or integrated development environments like this, because it handles these things. So what we're going to do first is declare an integer called value, this variable to hold the user's input value after we parse it with our try parse method. So now we've got that. Next, we're going to validate the value that the user entered. And here's the structure that we're using to parse to an integer. So we're going to say if int.tryParse, and here's the name of the text box, number text box.text, out value. So the text that's put in this text box called number text box, we're going to feed to this try parse method, and it's going to parse it into a number, an integer in this case, and store it in value. Now we're going to test if this is successful, we'll still be within this if box. If it's not successful, we'll go down here to this else box and display it's not a valid number. So if we're successfully able to parse this number, we're going to ask a couple more questions. And this is where the operator comes in, the requirement for this exercise. So if the value is less than 25 or the value is greater than 55, we're going to show in a message box using the message box.show method, the number is not valid. Else, if this isn't the case, that means the number is valid, so we'll display that. So if it's not less than 25 or greater than 55, it's within range, so we'll show the number is valid. And once again, if you look at these comparisons, this if goes with this else, this if goes with this else. So if we're not able to parse it, we go down here and we say the number is not a valid integer. Now, our exit button, we're just going to do this dot close and that will end our program. So what you always want to do before you run your program is save all. That makes sure that it collects any changes that you've made to any part of the program. And then we're going to run it. So here we are. The program's running now. So we want to check to see if this program will catch values outside of range. So let's try 20. That should not work because it's not in range. So we'll click the check value button. It says the number is not valid. Okay, let's look at the other end. Let's see if it'll catch values greater than 55. So let's put 65. Check value. It says the number is not valid. Okay, so we're good there. And let's check a number that is within range. So let's check 40. And it tells us the number is valid. Now let's check the final use case where we don't have a number in there. Let's check XXX. And we're going to click check value. And again, it tells us the number is not a valid integer in this case because it's a character. So I hope this video helped increase your understanding about this tutorial. If you have any questions, please email me and I would be happy to further discuss. Thank you.